Hi everyone. I'm Nan Washburn. I'm music director and conductor of the Michigan Philharmonic, and we're here today to talk to our principal harpist, Maurice Draughn, about his work and hopefully everything you'd ever want to know about the harp. Want to say a few words about him. He grew up in Detroit. He went to Tech High School. He got a bachelor in harp performance from Wayne State University, and then he continued on and got a master of church music from the Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, in an emphasis on organ and harp. And he plays all over Metro Detroit as a professional musician. He's a dedicated teacher. And more recently, I found out he's a published composer and arranger. And I really want to welcome Maurice and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Your busy schedule, I know, very, very busy.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Why the harp? How did you get into the harp? How did you get started in music?
So with the harp, it started in high school. So I went to Tech, and we had a harp program, or we still do have a harp program there, and it was a part of our curriculum. So as a music student, I had to take a string course. And so at the time, I was a band student because I played saxophone.
Oh, I didn't know that.
As well. Mm-hmm. And our string teacher at the time was not a fan of the band students. So I didn't want to take her string class and fail it. So I said, I'll take the harp. And my piano teacher from my childhood encouraged me to take the harp my ninth grade year, but I was like, I don't know if I want to play the harp. So I started harp my sophomore year at Cass, and like as they say, the rest is history. I've stuck with the instrument. I grew attached to it instantaneously, practicing after school. Anytime I can get into the harp room, I was there practicing. But I started on piano at 4, and that is where my musical upbringing began, because I come from a musical family. I'm a 4th generation musician. My mother, her father, his parents were all musicians, and classically trained, and also trained in church music. So it's been a great privilege and honor to carry on that tradition. And my daughter is actually involved in music. She's playing trombone now. Wow. As well as piano. So we just come from a musical family. So the fact that I'm playing harp, though, is unique, because being African-American male, you don't typically see males, or let alone African-Americans, playing the harp. So it's been a good journey on the harp. So glad I picked it up.
So it's really unusual, don't you think, that a harp program is in a high school? I mean, I've never heard of that outside of Tech. Does it happen elsewhere? Do you know?
Well, there are definitely more nowadays than it was when Cass's program started back in the early 1900s. It was a very unique program for a long time, because it was the only one in existence throughout the country, in a public school setting. So the program now has about 10 or 11 harps, but at the time I think they had 6. So that was quite the undertaking. Clarence Burns was the music department head at that time, and he envisioned a robust music program, and so harp was included with that. And so fortunately, the program has survived. It's almost going to be 100 years old, or it probably may have reached that point at this time. Harp and Vocal, which is the flagship ensemble for the harp program there, just celebrated 95 years in existence a couple of years ago. We had a celebration concert for that. So the program has been in good hands. Alums have carried the program on. First it was Velma Froud, then Patricia Terry Ross, and now currently Lydia Cleaver, providing harp instruction to students in an inner city public high school.
And is that open to all music students, or is it a select group that gets to be accepted?
It's a combination. Okay. It's a combination. It's an exploratory course for any student that's interested in taking a music course, but also we have a harp ensemble, and then we have harp and vocal. So those are the 2 classes where the advanced harpists would be enrolled as they progress through the program. So, but any student that's interested, regardless of their major at Cass, can take harp.
Wow. So I just have to ask you, I mean, were you teased at all being a guy in the program? Were there other young men that were there too, or?
Fortunately, there were the other guys in my class and others that went before me that played harp. Still, we were the minority in the class. Was predominantly females, but I actually had, once I learned the history of the harp and kind of understood the evolution, and to know that what I had grown accustomed to seeing, the stereotypes of who plays the harp and how people perceive the instrument. I learned that the masters of the harp back in the earlier times were men. So I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like Carlos Salcedo, Hasselmans, Chonier. I mean, it was just like all these men were playing the harp. So that took kind of the stigma off of it. And then being in church, I read about King David playing the harp. So that was kind of like another connection. I was like, okay, David played the harp. So
That's cool.
must
That's
have been
cool.
okay.
Yeah. So were there role
But
models that you had also growing up?
yes, so early on during my time at Cass, I met Harvey Griffin, who is no longer with us, but he was a phenomenal harpist. He played classical, he played pop, he played jazz. He was instrumental in developing the electroacoustic harp that we now utilize today for like pop and jazz type of genres. So, he was very open to just speaking with us, sharing with us his experiences, and helping us to see the possibilities. Also, Calvin Stokes, who was another alum closer to my generation, he came and performed. I remember he played Charlie Parker on the harp, and it was like, oh wow! But he could play like Debussy and everything else like flawlessly.
Wow.
So, and then another alum is John Wicke, who's also a phenomenal harpist. And so I had other guys who matriculated through the program before me, but again, we're very few and in between. So,
Mhm.
but I had a lot of encouragement, not too much teasing. I mean, I was still kind of a football physique type of guy in high school, so no one really teased me.
Yeah, that's good.
but
Handy.
but
So at what point did you say, okay, I want the harp? I mean, obviously you were playing piano and you
Mhm,
still do. I know because you play with us
mhm,
on occasion too, and organ.
mhm,
But at what point did
mhm.
harp kind of take center stage for you?
So harp took center stage roughly around my senior year in high school. It was a crossroad for me because I still kept an active schedule with practicing piano and doing the competitions and everything. But then I began to realize there are a lot of pianists in the world, but
Mm.
not a lot. So I figured I probably could, invest in that route and make an inroad into the a career as a harpist. And so I found that to be true. I've had a very fulfilling career as a professional harpist, playing across the country and just having a lot of opportunities. So it has paid off. I'm glad I made that choice in high school to pursue it.
Yeah, I imagine that was a little bit challenging, but you're right about the numbers of pianists and keyboard players everywhere. Um, yeah, but harp, it's like, oh wow, yeah. I know that
Mhm, mhm,
I once did a kids concert years ago. Well, we did the piece that actually you recorded with us, the Jack and the Beanstalk by
mhm,
Vonderfeld, and there was a
mhm,
little girl that came into the big room that we were doing this thing, and she went, "Oh my God, it's a harp!" I mean, there's just something that people are
mhm,
like, they just get so excited about it. Why
mhm.
is it so special? What really drew you to it?
Well, it's a unique instrument. I mean, very just to the aesthetic of the instrument, like just to hear it, to feel it, to play it. I mean, it's a unique instrument because you make this connection to it. Unlike, I mean, you can make connections to other instruments when you play them, but the harp, it's more intimate because your body is connecting to it as you pull the harp back and you begin to play the strings. You begin to feel the vibrations, and it's really a unique instrument. It challenges you quite a bit, no matter how long you played. There's always something that you have to continue to work on with your technique to get the best sound, to get just that very comfortable way of playing at ease. Unlike the piano, you're going against gravity, so you have to really build in that strength not only in your fingers but also your arms, and it just involves the whole body. But in terms of like when people generally see the harp when I'm playing out at a gig or a concert, I think just the size of the instrument, it's like overwhelming because it's this grand instrument that commands kind of that uh you know majestic, you know
Yeah,
I'm trying to find the word, but it's kind of
a
like it's
harp.
it's glamorous. It's Yeah, it's a harp. It's like it's so angelic. It's so special. You're in for something special when you see a harp in a room or on a stage. because the instrument just demands that attention.
Very, very cool. So it is also, I mean, like how long was it when before you were able to get your own harp? Because I know that they are not at all cheap. You said the harp studio had six at one point, another up to a number of, and I'm sure that you were able to
Mhm,
play it through high school. But then what
mhm.
happens?
So I was fortunate to have a wonderful teacher who was a dear friend today, Patricia Terry Ross. Like when we were at school, like again, she would allow us to come and practice in the practice room. But over the summers, she would open up her home, and she allowed me to come over. I mean, I probably overstayed my welcome a few times, but she was so gracious and just allowing me to work out because it's one of those things in the beginning, especially starting in high school. A lot of harpists out there start when they're younger. And so the unique thing about those of us that graduate from the CASTEC program is that we generally started in high school. So we're coming kind of behind the curve. So we have to catch up on some things. But having a piano background, it was easy to read the music. So that was not as daunting, but just the technique. And so she opened up her home. And for the first, I will say, 3 summers of my playing, I was pretty much at her house. I had the opportunity to go to Tanglewood, and the school take one of the harps from there to go do summer study. So I've always had that opportunity before I owned my personal harp to have access to other people's harps. Also, alums that graduated were when I had a gig, they will allow me to borrow their harp. Actually, one young lady that I used to borrow her harp from, she's actually my next door neighbor now. So it's kind of funny
Uh,
that
small world.
the connections you make is small world. So but then I think it was definitely in college. I think it was my the end of my freshman year. I already had saved up money for an instrument because it was between a harp or a bassoon at the time. Because my bassoon instructor Bob Williams from the DSO was like, "Well, you need to buy a bassoon because you're about to
Mm,
graduate from high school."
those aren't
So
cheap
it was like,
either.
no. So I already had started saving up money for that, and so then when I decided to pursue harp, I made the decision to and just save up a few more dollars or pennies, as they say. And I was able to purchase my first harp back in college. And this summer, I actually had the awesome opportunity and rare, to purchase a second harp that I have been wanting to get. So the harp
We see
to
them.
my right is a Salzedo model, and so he's the namesake of our technique. And I've always wanted a Salzedo, and one of our alums who's no longer playing uh, put the harp up for sale, and it's in mint condition. And I was like, this is awesome. So now I have the harp of my dreams, but I also have my original harp, which I cherish as well because I played a lot of gigs in concerts on that harp. So now I
But
have two harps. So started with none, now I have two. So
so are there advantages to having two so that if you're having to transport it or you have one at home
mhm.
and one
Absolutely. So most of the time, like when I had concerts where I was playing a concert cycle, I would leave my harp at the hall. So I would either arrive early or take a short break during rehearsal and then just go back to the stage tune and then do some more warming up. So having a harp at home allows me to be able to practice in between rehearsals or between
oh right.
rehearsals and concerts now.
Sure.
Or if I have, like in some cases, multiple events or performances on a single day, I can leave one harp and go pick up I can have a harp in two places, because
Wow.
that's always a nightmare when I have to play one concert and then pack up my harp and then run to the next one. So if I having two harps allows me to kind of be in two places at one time. So
So those are not easy instruments to transport. Now I think they have more evolved sets of wheels and various things that I remember now that they have that they didn't have a while back. But I mean, how much does it weigh? Does it weigh a lot?
so a harp weighs on average about 80 pounds. And we have a harp dolly or harp cart that we use to transport. You still have to lift it though to get it into the car. So everyone has their own system. I typically can lift it and push it into the car with ease. But generally, it can be a Herculean task to, especially on a day when you're tired. It's like, because you don't want to damage the instrument because it's very delicate. But transporting is not as bad because we have vehicles now that we can, like, they're all different types of vehicles. Before, if you were a harpist, you either had station wagon. I had a friend, a fellow harpist, who had a hearse one time to transport her harp. And it was kind of cool because she had the tray that they put the
Oh, yeah, handy.
caskets in. So yeah, so it was very handy. But it's one of those things, you drive around with a hearse, you're like, oh, okay, but it's interesting. But yes, basically, it's transporting the harp is not as bad when you're doing local things. When you're doing like across the country or international travel, it gets very complicated because the instrument can't go into a cargo hold on a plane because it's not unless it's climate control. But also, you still risk damaging the instrument because you can pad it, you can cushion it, but it's a very delicate instrument. So it's not built for durability of off-road travel.
Well, also
So,
the weight distribution is kind of,
hmm
tricky
hmm
as well, I would imagine. So,
absolutely.
like, how many strings does it have? I mean, what's the deal? I mean,
So,
how can you tell where you are? And
hmm so the full-size harp has the two I have are concert grand. They're full-size harps. They're 47 strings. So that's why it takes us so long to tune. Everyone always has tuning jokes for harpists because we have to tune 47 and the string players only tune four. So but we know, no, nothing against string players, but we have color coding on our strings. It was kind of a later development where you have the C strings color coded as red, and then the F strings color coded as F. I'm sorry, black. Excuse me. The F strings are color coded as black. So that is pretty much how we kind of know where we are because it's set up diatonically like the piano keys, where you have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and then we use the pedals to do what you would do with black keys to do the sharps and flats. Um, and also naturals, which I can explain when we talk about pedals. But um, generally, you get accustomed to it. But depending on the lighting, I've had some performances in a pit or a show where it was very dark. I had my stand light showing the music, but then I couldn't see my strings because they're translucent. Where basically, if you don't have the right lighting,
you can't
you're
see the
kind
color.
of
Yeah.
you're kind of feeling. So the color coding kind of helps, but again, it's one of those challenges that you learn to live with when you play the harp.
So, but they're all. I mean, you've got the very, very long low strings, and then the very,
hmm
very the ones very at top. They're very short.
hmm
They're made out of different materials, right?
Correct. So the top strings are made out of nylon. The middle strings are made out of gut. We have natural and synthetic gut strings now. And then the lower strings are made out of there's a string on the inside, but they're wound with wire, and so to give it more resonance when you play it. But there's actually a string inside of the wire, the winding in the bass strings.
So it seems like low strings look a little bit more like piano strings with the wound,
Yes, they're similar to
and
it.
then
They're similar to piano.
and
Piano.
then the very upper ones could look similar to maybe a uh, classical guitar with nylon strings,
Harp.
similar, like except much shorter. Um,
Mhm.
so do you want to talk about those pedals? I think a lot of us for years and years and years had no clue about, you just see,
Mhm.
you playing and gliss and doing all those fun things. Um,
Mhm.
but you're very busy with your feet. And
Yes.
maybe you can talk about that because it is something that a lot of people don't understand what's going on there. They're not the same kind of
Sure.
pedals as a piano, for example.
No, no. Again, the piano has three, we have seven, and they each come with three different notches. So pedals they're a very interesting topic for the harp because um, we are trained early on to be very graceful. One of the advantages for when ladies were able to wear those big hoop dresses is that you don't see all the work going on because it's very busy. But even now in our contemporary attire, we still have to find a way to make it graceful so that when we're playing, people aren't staring at our feet. Um, and it's a juggling act. It takes a lot of precision and coordination because you're playing with your hands, both hands. You're reading the music, and then you have your feet. I liken it to playing the organ to some degree, so that kind of helps because I play organ as well
Hmm.
because you're used to kind of multitasking when you're doing that. But the pedals are interesting because the way that they're arranged, they have three positions on the pedal harp. So the upper position is considered the flat position. So most of the time when we think up, we think sharp, but actually when it's in the up position, it is flat, and that is the least amount of tension on the strings. So they basically are all open. So when you play the strings on the harp, they'll be open. When you engage it into the second notch, it becomes natural. So natural. So again, we're doing that reverse. So in the middle, so we have flat at the top, natural in the middle, and then when you go into the third notch, it is the most tension on the strings. It becomes sharp. And so how that happens in the creation of the modern harp, the pedals engage the mechanisms, and so there's a disc for when you have it in. There's two discs. So when it's open, the discs are not engaged. When you put it in natural, then it engages one disc, and then when you put it in sharp, it engages two discs. And so those discs actually cut the length of the string by those increments as you engage the pedals. And so it's a very intricate science, because you know the harp is a beautiful instrument, but if you were to take it apart, you would see all of these working mechanisms. You'll see riveting. I mean, it's if you go to the factory in Chicago, the Line and Healy factory, you can actually see how a harp is put together in each stage, and you can see the skeleton of the harp, because it's a lot of oil parts in it. I mean, again, my harp technician who works on my harp showed me. I went to a shop to get my new harp regulated, and it looks like you just see pieces of harps all around. It's kind of like a Halloween harp display, because you see all the innards of the harp. But again, all of that is inside of like the column and the neck and all that, so you don't see it. But it's a mechanical instrument actually, so it works in fine tuning. But the pedals are connected to a pedal rod that goes up the column, and then they go into the mechanisms at the top of the harp.
So the discs you describe, those are at the top of the harp on that, is that metal at the top?
Yes, it's a metal brass plate, and then the discs are located on top of each other side by side, and then the strings are wound through them, and they go into the pins at the top. And so, when we initially replace a string, we put it in open position, and then we wind it up, and then we eventually get it to where it needs to go. You typically don't try to tune with the pedals engaged, because you're gonna put grooves in the strings, which will impact the intonation, which I can talk about more when we talk about tuning.
So now when you put a pedal in a position, you're not just changing one string though. You're changing
Correct.
all of
So
the strings, like a
mhm,
C would become a C sharp, or is
yeah,
that correct?
all of the C. Yeah, when you engage the C pedal to C sharp, you're engaging all of the C strings. Same with if you go to flat. So that's one of the things that unlike like a lever harp where you can engage the levers for an individual string, on the
Mhm.
pedal harp you're engaging all of them, so it kind of limits you a little bit, which is why we're not considered a chromatic instrument, um, because even though we can play half steps and half steps up and down the scale using our pedals, we can't do it fluidly like you would do on piano where you're just playing up the keys.
So I was going to ask you, like you said that in playing piano, you could read the music for harp, but the music has to be written differently. I mean, as you just said, it can't be as chromatic, but there's some other limitations or good things too. But you can't.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
You play with all five fingers.
That no, we played with four fingers. I was going to mention that. Like the good thing is that with the harp, I mean, it's kind of like the piano where you can you can kind of do your crossings and everything. But with the harp, we have to be pretty creative with our fingering. But sometimes we can tell when a part is written by a pianist or written for a piano or for a pianist, because we're trying to play and it's like, well, wait a minute, I can't. I have to fix the groupings and everything. But yes, so the fingering actually help us to navigate in certain kinds of ways. Now we can play, like when we do our chords, we can play a greater span than you can on piano. Even if you have smaller hands on the harp, you can. Some people just roll the chords, but you can cover more.
Hmm.
Like the chords can be more lush and expanded on the harp than you would on piano.
And why is that?
Um,
Is it because the strings are closer together than the keys? Is that?
For the most part, yes. So a combination of depending on how the chord is voiced, because we can do inharmonic voicing as well. So what may be like um, something that would be like, I'm trying to think of a good example. So if I was in D flat and I played D flat, A flat, and F, but then I wanted to bring it, I didn't want to stretch my thumb to play up on the F. I could put E sharp. So that shortens the length at the top, or the spacing between my A flat and the top pitch. So I can play an E sharp. I mean, theoretically that doesn't sound right, but but the harp has that capability because of the pedals to do a lot of inharmonics. So that allows us to kind of cheat every
Just
now and then.
say what an inharmonic is, just
So
so.
inharmonic is when you have the same label of a pitch. I'm sorry, you have a sounding pitch that has two labels. So for instance, F can be E sharp, um, uh, uh, C can be B sharp. So it's basically being able to interplay. Unlike the piano, though, in most instruments, I mean, sometimes with the instruments like woodwinds, you can have multiple fingerings for one particular note, or you'll have a different fingering for like a F sharp rather than a G flat on like saxophone or something like that. On the harp is literally another string. So we're not like on the piano. If you play F, that same key for F would be E sharp, but on the harp it would be two separate strings. Which is why we can do when we do our glissandi. That's why the glissando sound very ethereal, because we can do inharmonics. So you get a fuller, rich sound as opposed to just playing across the white keys or black keys on the piano.
How interesting. I didn't realize that part. So that you actually are filling out the gliss with more notes.
With more notes inharmonically. And obviously we have some limitations, like we can't, there's not an inharmonic for G. We can't do double flats and double sharps because the pedals only go up and down by half steps.
Okay. So how long does it take you to tune it? And how do
Great
you tune
question. So, so I have a method where, depending on the amount of time, like if I, are stuck in traffic and trying to get to, get to the hall and tune and everything, the quickest that I can do is about 10 minutes. I can do a quick tune in 10 minutes. Typically, I try to tune before I leave home, so that way when I get to wherever I'm performing, the tuning will be somewhat close to where it should be, and I'm just adjusting once the harp adjusts to the room. There are a lot of variables with the harp. Again, it's a very challenging instrument, not just to play, but also to tune, because it's very sensitive to climate change.
I was going to
So so basically, I keep my home, at a consistent temperature, so that helps the harp stay healthy. But if I'm going to play out, as we've had over the past couple of years, in below freezing temperatures, I have to warm my car up, and I have to double pack my harp so that I can maintain a relative climate from it going from my house to the car. And then once again, when I get to the performance venue, I have to go scope out where I'm going. So I often leave my car running so that the harp is still in a constant state of being warmed, and then go in. So it can take going like quick climb, if you're going from one room to another or one temperature to another, but you generally don't want to just expose it to, like, a flash of freezing temperatures, in terms of like when you take the harp, we take the covers off. So the covers that you normally see my harp, transported in, are kind of like blankies, like a comforter, they keep the harp nice and warm. But tuning, getting back to tuning, so tuning is one of those things where there are a lot of variables. So one, we have to make sure we keep our harp regulated, because they're like pads where the pedals are that wear over time. So there's felt that goes around the actual pedal, and then there's a pad that goes above to keep it from popping in the notch. And so over time those wear out. So we get a regulation, we call a harp regulation, where a technician goes through the whole harp, checks the tuning pin, check the disc, check everything to make sure the harp is in working order. But so regular regulation helps with tuning, but also once you get to the venue, you have to allow the harp to acclimate to the temperature,
oh, yeah.
because as the temperature in my house typically won't be the temperature in the concert hall. So I have to allow it, because if I just take the cover off and start tuning, I'm going to tune longer because the harp is adjusting. So typically I let the harp sit for about 5 to 10 minutes. Once I get there, I'll unpack it first, and then I set up everything else, and then I'll get to tuning it. So once you tune it, you start in the middle, in the gut string areas because that's the most sensitive to climate, to temperature variations. And so you tune the middle octave first in the guts, and then you tune the bass because those are pretty stable. And then you go up to the nylons because those tend to change the least, unless you're an extreme change from cold to hot or hot to cold.
Now you use
And
a
then
little
you can check.
machine, don't you?
Yes. So when I started at Cass, we had a pitchfork. So I think the department, Ms. Ross purchased tuners. I know it was after I left because I remember coming back one time and I thought, wait a minute, we had a pitchfork, and then I think we graduated to a pitch pipe at one point. But those were always, if you ever played a pitch pipe, you know how brutal it can be if you don't blow, you don't blow right. It's like you're wheezing to get a pitch. So, but now, yes, we use, they have portable strobe tuners. So we use that, or some people have the one that has the dial on it, the needle. But typically we tune a bit high, so like 441, 442, because generally what happens is once the harp continues to acclimate, the strings will drop. And so we tend to be more in tune with the orchestra. If you tune it at 440, for instance, when you're playing with other people, it will drop down a little bit if it gets too warm, or that type of thing.
Do the
But
stage
basically tune.
do the stage lights affect the tuning? Does it get it? Like,
Absolutely. So nowadays with LED lighting, it's not as bad. But back in the days when we had, the regular lighting, depending on the venue, if they didn't have proper ventilation, it could be brutal because the harp, just the strings can't take it. I mean, the harp itself can't take extreme heat or extreme cold, but the strings will start popping or start fraying. So it's a delicate instrument. But tuning generally, 15 to 30 minutes, it could take you to tune your harp. If you have new strings, that extends that time. But we're trained to tune in various, depending on the situations, because sometimes you have to do a quick tune even in rehearsal after you've done an extended tune at the beginning of rehearsal.
so how long do the strings last? And do you replace them as they need it, or do you have to replace everything at once?
So typically, I can make it through a season with the whole set, but occasionally I will have strings that will pop depending on the wear and tear. So on average, I may lose about 5 or 6 strings a year, a performance season. But generally, we replace our strings every year because of the wear and tear. What happens is the strings begin to get grooves from the disc because it's
Mm.
grinding into. I hate to use that grinding, but it's digging into the string the more you engage the pedal. So you want to make sure that when they regulate your harp, the string is as fresh as possible because if it pops, if you regulate a string that has the grooves in it and it eventually pops and you replace with a new string, that regulation will be off because it's regulated to the groove and not regulated to being a brand new string.
So can that be dangerous if a string pops? I mean, is it
It sounds worse than than it actually is. Um, and then depending on the area that it pops. I mean, the higher strings, when they pop, it just sounds like a, beep, it's just kind of like a, it's like a cartoon, it's a real high pitch pop, and it just snaps. The gut strings tend to kind of be a bit more dramatic because it sounds like an explosion. It's like, because it's in the most resonant part of the harp, so it's like boom,
yeah.
and it's just very dramatic. So gut strings are dramatic just because they don't want to stay tuned, you know. But anyway, the bass strings, it's rare to have a bass string pop, but when it does, it sounds like thunder. Um, so generally, I watch my bass strings because the good thing about the bass strings, because they're wound by wire, when you see the wire coming undone, you typically would change it because it won't be long. Typically, you don't want your bass strings to pop in a live performance. So because it's loud. I mean, it's like the gut strings and the nylons. That I've had them pop during the concert, and fortunately, it's been during loud, medium loud to loud sections. So, but yes, you will hear the pop amplified because of the soundboard. So it's a something that can surprise people who are not used to or accustomed to it.
So I know we were going to talk about the pieces that you're playing on our video, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the other things that you're doing. You're a teacher, and I want to know about this harp instruction and performance program. What is that?
Yes, so we, Lydia Cleaver and myself established a feeder after school program into the CASTEC program. Right now it's on hiatus because of COVID and because of some things with restructuring in our district. But we started it several years ago, and we basically invited middle school students to come to CAS and receive harp instruction after school. At one point, there were troubadour harp programs in the elementary and middle schools across the city, but those have since been discontinued. So we started with about 9 students, and out of those 9, 3 ended up attending CAS, and so it pretty much fulfilled its mission at the time we started the program. But generally during that time, we were trying to introduce a new generation of harpists that were thinking about going to high school, getting them into the CASTEC program so that we can continue to have a feeder into that program. So we ended up having students that were from the Detroit Public School District, but even some students that were homeschooled, some students that went to private schools. So it was a really good venture when we started, and we're looking for a way to reinvigorate it once we get past this pandemic.
So now we've mentioned CASTech a whole lot, and you are now teaching at CASTech. So how is that to come
Yes.
back to your high school, and what do you do there?
So it's been a delight. I'm in my second year back at CAS, or coming to CAS as a teacher. I'm the director of choral activities there, and I also teach piano. So it's like I've come full circle, and it's been awesome. Like I talked to my all my teachers that are still with us, Pat Terry Ross, Dallas Grove, who's our choir teacher, and I just share how it's a joy to be back in that environment to provide to our current students what I received when I was a student. Many people who are familiar with CASTech know it's a special place. It's had a very well-respected reputation for several decades as producing some of the most fine musicians, not here in Detroit, not only just here in Detroit, but across the world. So to be able to inspire these young students, as I was inspired many years ago now, when I was in high school, it's been a joy. And I'm able to actually connect with the harp students as well, because I pop my head into the harp room and try to encourage the kids, especially the guys that I see taking, like, yeah, I played, so it's okay.
Okay. Yeah. So what else do you do? I mean, I know that you are so busy, and we're always
Mhm,
thrilled when we can have you play in the orchestra. But you're a
mhm.
busy guy. So, like, where else do you play? What else are you doing?
So, I'm sub pretty much everywhere. So I've had the opportunity. Started a couple of years ago, started to sub with the DSO, and I'm actually doing this week. Did my first rehearsal with MOT for their Twilight production coming up next week. So it's been interesting. It's doing a Wagner uh, opera that's like 3 hours long. It's going to be done, I think, in 30 minutes.
Whoa.
So I'm in one scene. It's Gadademerong, and it's the scene with the Rhine Maidens and Siegfried. So the part is interesting. It's like because the orchestrations for 6 harps, and so I'm playing 6 harps on 1 harp, which is fun. And it also has marimba, xylophone. They're actually playing some of my harp parts from the original, which is interesting. And then a violinist and a hornist. So that's our scene. So it's been interesting, and we're playing outside in the opera garage. So it's like, ooh, it's pretty
Wow.
fun.
Really?
So I mean, it's just good to be able to do this and do that, do that performance, just to get back into performing, because it's been even though I've been home, I've been busy, like, doing some more arranging, but not really as much performing. So, but I played quite a few areas with the regional orchestras. So when in a pre-COVID world, I would be pretty active around this time, just playing. Um,
It's been a
and
really
so I
interesting few months trying to figure out how we keep going. And I'm
Mhm.
really glad to hear. I didn't realize that you were a composer. I mean, I knew you did some arranging. So how did you
Mhm.
get into composing? Was that because of frustration of people writing not so well for harp, or?
So, well, it's interesting because I started arranging. Well, I can take it back to Cass actually. When we were in harp and vocal, or when I was in harp and vocal as one of the harpists, harp and vocal is an ensemble full of treble voice female singers with harp accompaniment. So as a male, the only way I could get in was to play the harp. So, um, so we had to actually adapt our parts because they sang from a choral score that had
Mm,
piano accompaniment, and so that was my first experience kind of at arranging for the harp because Miss Ross would let her advanced students kind of make their own parts from the piano score.
mhm.
And so from there, I learned how to do the pedaling. I learned about the limitations about chromaticism and certain things that that are pretty difficult to do on the harp. And I did my first arrangement in college of Gershwin's Three Preludes for Piano. One of my classmates was playing it for her recital, and I said that would sound cool on the harp. So I tried to do a one harp. I tried to do a single harp solo arrangement of it, and that didn't work. So I said, well, let me do it for two harps. And so that arrangement was like it took me into the realm of arranging for the harp. And from there, I started to do more arrangements because I played it at a conference of other harpists, and they were like, "Can we get that?" And I was like, "Well, it's not published." So I got it published legally, and it's out for consumption. And then I started to do more arrangements, and now I get commissions for arrangements. And as of this year, I've done several commissions for original pieces for harp ensemble, for harp in different combinations. So I actually was supposed to have a premiere of a piece back in June by the Easton Trio. Velda Kelly, Nadine Delury, and Patricia Terry Ross they have a trio, and they commissioned me to write a piece for them. And so it was supposed to be premiered this past June, but it was canceled because of COVID. So we're hoping to have that premiere pretty soon. But that's one of my most recent pieces that I've composed for harp. I also do choral arranging and composing, so I've had some opportunities with that as well.
Very cool. And I just have to ask you because there's been so much discussion in classical music circles about all the concern about Black Lives Matter, and really
Hmm.
looking lots of soul searching among orchestras and other organizations about how to have more diversity and inclusiveness. Do you see any progress for a lot of the institutions around? Are we making any headway?
Hmm. Well, I think there's a more of an awareness now because of where society is right now. And there was a great conference back in, I think it was a couple of years ago, the American League of Orchestras had when they were here in Detroit,
Right.
and I was able to attend a few sessions. And I think ever since then, there's been an ongoing discussion about this particular topic and making sure there's equity and access for musicians of color to be able to play. Um, I've been fortunate. I don't have too many horror stories. Comments from time to time, but not any like overt racism have I experienced compared to my predecessors like who Ann Hobson Pilot, who shares a story about her first. She was a former principal harpist of the Boston Symphony, and I had actually through Tanglewood, I had an opportunity to connect with her and get to know her and still in communication with her. But she shared her story about when her first rehearsal, and a bassist walked up from the orchestra and told her that she looks like she can fry a good, pan or pot of chicken or something like that. I mean, and she took it in stride, and
Wow.
she said, "Well, actually, I can," and then that kind of just she handled the situation. But you know, nowadays it's never that open. It's more like just different things that sometimes, as a person of color playing in an orchestra and knowing that I have to come, 200% sometimes when
Mhm.
others can do 100%, or can do less than that. And just feeling that, if I mess up, okay, I may lose, opportunity. That's kind of always been the case. I think for us as musicians of color, in a professional sense, is that there's kind of this I don't want to say fear, but there's this always thing in the back of our minds, like we know we can't mess up because we don't want to mess it up for the person that comes after us. But also we realize that we may not be given the same latitude or grace that other musicians, non-colored musicians, can have access to. And I've seen it, but again, I don't dwell on it to the point where it inhibits my ability to operate in an environment where I may be the only African American in the orchestra. And I've been in, that's been my journey for the most part. Is that there are times where I am the only African American in the ensemble. I don't, I'm not always made to feel like I'm the only one, like in terms of like being isolated. Even in those top tier professional orchestras that I've had the opportunity to sub in, there's always been this welcoming. And I think because we as a society are trying to move into being more inclusive and embracing others, there's still work to be done. I'm not trying to paint, that everything is fine, but I just feel like, the perspective of going in and hoping that you can see the good in people, that even when they do something that may not, may be inappropriate or may be off base, not to just jump to the fact that they're just being vindictive or mean spirited or even racist. That you can try to turn that situation around, like Miss Pilot taught and showed us. You can turn it around and disarm that person so that they can realize we're more of the same than we are different.
I would imagine that you are, for many years already, I'm sure, have been a role model for kids that see you playing harp and just go,
Mm-hmm.
I could do that now. I know
Mm-hmm.
that it's certainly been a case for me conducting that. I've had little boys in the audience that say, well, can boys be conductors too? And it's just kind of amusing, but it's again, it's that
Mm-hmm.
visual, just being able to see someone on stage that looks like you or can identify
Mm-hmm.
with. So have you
Mm-hmm.
had experiences with that, kids?
Yes, I actually have. It's been male harpists that have been out there, of all colors, and but young African American children have come up and and I do it for all kids. I let them come up and look at the harp, but it's one of those things where even as in education, I've been able to connect with other programs. There's a program in Atlanta that I did a commission for, and the program has predominantly young African American and students of color. It's a Harp program down in Georgia in Atlanta, and to be able to connect and communicate with them, write a piece for them. I mean, it was really a good experience for us to bond and to see those students go on and add to the community, the harp community, as pursuing a professional career or even avocational. So I always feel like when I'm out performing, I'm representing myself, obviously, but I'm also trying to be a role model for those young musicians, just like I was at one point, looking up. I look up and still look up to my teacher, Patricia Terry Ross, because she was a black woman that played with the DSO, recorded with them. She's continuing to work with MOT as the principal harpist, and just what she instilled in me as a young African American harpist. And her husband, Frank Ross, also just a wonderful couple, and to have them help and continue to nurture. I want to do that for the young kids that are coming up too. So it's always, I think, good to have that give back when you've been given to mentality, so that you understand that when you get to a point in your life where you're able to do things that everyone can't do, that you try to help others get to that same place.
It keeps you busy, that's for sure, and young,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
doing
Yes.
things with
Yes.
purpose. And I think that certainly with the COVID, we're all kind of having to look again, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And I'm just really happy that you are such a force, in the music community and keeping things going. And I guess we should talk about what the music we're going to have you play. We had a couple excerpts that you'd asked about that from Michigan Philharmonic performances. One was the Capriccio Espagnol, the Rimsky-Korsakov. There's a small harp cadenza. And then there's also the Suite from Swan Lake that we played a few years ago, and more extensive cadenza. Maybe you could talk a little bit about those.
Sure. So I'm glad we had those in the archives because they represent the typical perception people have of the harp in a good way. because Tchaikovsky and Rimsky-Korsakov are friends of the harp world in terms of their compositional techniques and styles. So I wanted to highlight Rimsky-Korsakov because we know that with orchestration and next to Berlioz, he was up there. But his solo demonstrates some of the techniques or the effects that we can do on the harp. So obviously we have the arpeggios that we play, but then we have the glissandi, and the version of the cadenza that I play was later enhanced by Carlos Salcedo, but the essence of it is still Rimsky-Korsakov's work. But again, it uses that whole freeness and fullness of the harp when you hear the gliss going up and down, and that's kind of like what the harp is synonymous with. Whenever I go somewhere, people, can you play a gliss for me? Can you play even if they don't know what a gliss is, they say, can you play the, so they get all excited. And then Tchaikovsky, what can I say about Tchaikovsky? His cadenzas are always, I mean, they can be friend or foe depending on the performance. But the Nutcracker cadenza is like the Waltz from the Waltz of the Flowers. It's the most popular one. But Swan Lake is another one. I think it's more extended, as you said, but again demonstrates how you can kind of create those harmonies and be very expressive, and it can carry through and cut through the orchestra even when you're playing by yourself. Like, it just gives the harp this more grand presence in the orchestra context.
So I was actually going to ask you what your like, if the favorite thing to do on the harp, is it a glissando? I mean, you get all the credit for it,
Well, a glissando has guts and glory, I should say. I should describe it. The glory is that the sound is wonderful. The guts is that you end up getting calluses and blisters if you do it too much. Okay. So yeah. The good thing is that the more you play, you build up the tolerance and endurance, and your skin gets acclimated to it, to the point where you have to file the calluses down after a while. But yeah, we have picks now. We call them harp picks. They look like guitar felt picks that we can use to play gliss. The principal harpist from DSO, she actually has her own line of picks, Patty Marcy Fletcher. They're really great because they save your fingers. I tend to use picks when I have the time to go between playing. Most pieces in the symphonic canon, they include like playing a figure and then going right to the gliss. So I use the picks generally when I'm doing like an arrangement or something where I'm just playing gliss through the whole thing, and I try to look involved, like I'm
yes.
because it's like, okay, here's another gliss, So playing it too many times in succession, you begin to build up blisters because it's actually burning if you're really cutting through your skin.
Ooh. So. Did not know that.
Well, not sound gruesome, but I mean you're going, the contact and going through the strings, especially if it's rapid. You're affecting the skin, the texture of your skin, I should say. So maybe not cutting, but.
So then we're also going to have you play three short kind of recital pieces, would you call them? Maybe you
Hmm.
could talk a little
Hmm.
bit about those pieces. Why did you choose them?
Sure. So these three pieces are very dear to me. They come from my days of studying the harp, and um, the first one that I wanted to start, well, the one I want to start with is the Britain piece. I played it on my graduate recital,
Hmm.
and the piece that you will hear is the toccata. It is the second movement from Britain's Suite for Harp. It was composed in 1969, and the work was written and dedicated for Ossian Ellis, who's a phenomenal Welsh harpist and frequent musical collaborator of Britain. So he's responsible for us having wonderful harp parts. Even though Britain writes really well for the harp, it's always good when a composer, like, their partnership was kind of what we use to advocate for composers getting to know a harpist, because it makes it much easier. Because one of the things I should have mentioned earlier is that we always have to edit our parts, and so having Mr. Ellis with Britain, this work is phenomenal in this full context. But this movement in particular is short, whimsical. It's full of shifting meters and continuous motion. So it's very short, but it's a very nice piece within the context of the suite. The second piece is by Hindemith. I played this piece in my undergraduate recital, his Sonata for Harp. It was composed in 1939. It was one of 26 sonatas for one or more instruments that Hindemith composed between the years of 1935 and 1955. So I'm, now always do you have a composer, giving some type of, allowance to the harp to write a serious piece for it. And so it was kind of cool that Hindemith wrote for the harp, and he writes very well. It's a very, very well written sonata. But the third movement of this sonata is prefaced by a poem by the German poet Holti. And the poem describes a poet's harp hung behind the altar of the church at the poet's funeral. So the sounds of the harp echo in the church with a melody that scans through the lines of this poem. So if you don't mind, I'd like to indulge you with this poem. It's entitled Lied, and it's translated. I'm not going to speak German. It says, "Dear friends, when I have departed, place the little harp behind the altar, where on the wall the wreaths of many young maidens gleam. Then the sexton shows the little harp to the friendly traveler, and the red ribbon, twined around the harp, rustles and flutters below the golden strings. Often at sunset, he says with awe, strings hum quietly like bees, and the children, hearing the sounds, run in from the churchyard and see the wreaths quivering." So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if I could perform it, I normally share the poem before I perform the third movement. I'll stop after the second movement, because it really kind of gives you the story behind that third movement. And it's one of those calming, for it to be a funeral piece, it's very calming, reflective. It's not sad. So I really enjoy playing that piece for people. And then the last piece is back from my high school days. So as you can see, I did kind of a progression, so graduate, undergraduate, and now high school. Song in the Night is definitely not a high school level piece, but it's played by professionals as a standard. It was published in 1955. It's by Carlos Salcedo, who is the person who authored our technique, the harp technique I studied at CAST. The piece highlights the numerous effects that Salcedo expanded or created on the harp. Salcedo was instrumental in bringing the harp into the 20th century from a compositional perspective and also a harp construction perspective. As I mentioned, the harp I have, my newest harp, is a harp that he designed through the Lion and Healy Company. And he actually designed an earlier model that was more classical in nature, but now this one's more modern. He was about bringing the harp into the forefront, not as a parlor instrument, but as a bona fide, symphonic instrument. So he also wrote a short synopsis to aid the listener in the visualization of the work. So if you would indulge me for this one as well. So Song in the Night at the outset depicts the warm breeze of a summer night. Suddenly, in a flash, strange sounds are heard, reminiscent of three muted trumpets, answered by a little bell. Then the suggestion of a serenade, more or less Spanish in character, grows and dies away. At the close of this episode, a morning breeze is felt. The composition fades away in faint rustlings.
Mm.
And so those are all the pieces that I wanted to share, because I think they just highlight truly, the harp from a perspective that people don't often hear it from. They hear, as I mentioned before, the glyphs, and then sometimes we do transcriptions from earlier periods. And those tend to be kind of light, but this kind of brings it into, oh, I didn't think the harp can make that type of sound. Like it comes across as, whoa, the harp is like a grand instrument as opposed to a delicate, you know, instrument that's barely heard.
So we also were able to find in our archives, you've soloed with the Michigan Philharmonic a couple times, and we did find, I think it was, well, it was a number of years ago when you did the WC dances with us. And
Mhm.
I remember talking with you at the time that we did it, and I think I mentioned it to the audience too, that there were, this piece kind of demonstrated the dueling types of harps being played at that time. And maybe you could talk
Mhm.
about that and tell us about the excerpts that we'll hear.
Sure. So the WC Dances was written originally for the chromatic harp, and needless to say, the chromatic harp did not survive. um, but it was built to solve the issue of the harp's limited ability to be played chromatically. And so the harps were double strung. They were cross strung, I should say, not double, but cross strung. And so to this day, I've been trying to get to one to play it
Mm.
because I heard it's quite the experience. But basically, I think one side was like the piano, the white keys on the piano, and the other side was like the black keys on the piano. So again, it had to be kind of interesting to play it. But needless to say, the competition was against that particular harp that was being built, and then what came to be the modern pedal harp, so the double action harp. So it's called double actions because when the harp was being developed in the 1800s, going into the 1900s. Obviously, you started out with the levers, but then they began to do hooks that connected to the pedals. And so you were able to do a half steps. We called that the single action harp. But then there was a big competition between Paris and London, the harp makers in Paris and London, and the Paris manufacturer won out in creating a double action harp where you could do the sharps and the flats, and then of course you had it in the open position for the flats, and then you had the natural, and then you had the sharp. So that particular harp had a piece composed for it, the Introduction and Allegro by Maurice Draughn. So you had these two pieces going at competition. There was a competition to see based on, like, WC was commissioned to do the piece for the chromatic harp, and then Ravel did one for the pedal harp. And needless to say, the chromatic harp did not survive, and the pedal harp was able to perform the WC just as well, or probably even better, than the chromatic harp. Um, so we have that in the can today. Now, because the piece was written for the chromatic harp, the challenge in playing the WC dances, it's a glorious, beautiful piece, is that you have a lot of chromaticism. So it's like, it kind of makes you, as beautiful and wonderful it is to work a piece, sometimes it's kind of like you're doing a juggling act with your feet. So you're trying to maintain this ground level of stability up here, and then below your feet are just dancing. And so I think it's appropriately called WC dances because our feet are dancing. I'm just cracking a joke. But the two excerpts I want to share today, one from each movement. So from the sacred movement, which is the first movement, this section features the chromaticism on the harp. In the development section, before we hear the opening theme replayed. And so I picked this one because I wanted the viewers to hear how the harp can do that chromaticism. It's so we're playing a lot of different, shifts in the harmonic structure or progressions, but you can hear the harp kind of do the chromaticism in the melodic line, and then also in the accompanying line when the chamber orchestra takes back over the melodic line, and then in the recap of the theme, you can kind of hear the traditional chords rolled, and there is very little chromaticism in that section. The second excerpt is from the second dance, the dance profane. This one, I picked this excerpt because you get to hear the second theme in the work, but also how the harp can do the traditional things like scales and arpeggios. You can hear how even being able to have the ability to change the pedals to do the combinations. You can hear the glissandi at the end. It sounds like full and rich with the orchestra. But then there's this middle section, we call it the sunrise section, where you'll hear the harp playing a melodic line with the thumb, but then you'll hear all these noodling figures going on, and it's a lot of inharmonic playing. So it'd be like playing if you're on the piano, you'd be doing like a double type of fingering for that. But on the harp, we have two strings, so we can play a note twice and still keep it fluid, I should say. And so you'll hear the enharmonic capabilities to create a more sonorous sound when for that middle section. So that's why I felt like those two excerpts would kind of bring home some of the things I was discussing from earlier about how the harp has this ability to do what most instruments can't do.
I've learned so much. I mean, and I thought I like knew everything about art. So I really want to thank you, Maurice. I know you are a really busy guy, and but this has been really enlightening, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And we can't wait to have you back and making some
Mhm.
orchestral music with us inside, hopefully at some point.
Mhm.
So take care, and thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You as well. Thank you, man. It's been my pleasure. Thank you, and I hope the viewers enjoy the performances on this video.